mom's parents.
So we will not have class next week because we will leave Wednesday evening and won't be back until Saturday morning. So
We're gonna leave after church service.
we,
You guys.
you not welcome.
Where is it?
Nashville.
Oh, man.
So it's at the Lebanon Church of Christ over there. It's actually a preacher's family marriage retreat. So it's very specifically dealing with what the preacher's family deals with and keeping that marriage strong.
That is actually a surprise.
We drove through Nashville. You mean you flew through Nashville?
No, we drove to Nashville.
No, I mean.
You're going so fast you flew.
Oh,
I
yeah.
tell you what got me was.
Lyra.
Used to go to
Oh,
Paul Ball
you doing?
games back in the 80s in Dallas. Now,
She's not here
maybe
yet.
more than five
She's not here yet.
in Dallas.
They're crazy.
It scared me. I'm just on being in Dallas, Texas. And
Mm-mm.
this was 30 years ago.
I'm saying, I won't drive Memphis. I've done it.
Oh, no.
I've done it, but I was like, those people are just nuts.
Oh,
They're just nuts, just plain out nuts.
I tell you, I had to watch it in Jonesboro. Traffic, intersections, merging.
I don't have too much trouble, except it seems like the last few times I've been to NEA. I don't know if people is on their phones or they're just, I don't know, but just, they just, I guess just don't, they're not paying attention. I've almost wrecked twice. And it's just because, I think a lot of it's people's on their phones and they just keep coming over, gradual and stuff. I don't know.
My mom today, she was trying to fix everything. I didn't know that she was moving it. Like it was one of those circular roads.
I weed too far. I was like, woo. That's not where I wanted to be.
You wanna take that to the-
My aunt's car has a sensor, so if
Mhm.
it beeps.
Yes.
She disabled them since I got them.
Girl, when the car.
And I'm like, "Word."
When I had for this girl, took off my lane, he don't.
Yeah, she decided, and she totaled the car out 2 years ago. And I was like, Barb, you might need those sensors. I'm just, saying, put it up there.
My mom likes the sensors because on her way home from work, she's kind of drained and she likes being able to have she in fact one time was really, she hadn't had the car very long and it was really funny. She had drifted just enough. It popped up with a warning and it was like a cup of coffee. It's like, need to take a break.
Oh.
So, okay. Carolyn is not going to be here, I'm sure. Sharon is on her way, but they were running late from Jonesboro and she had to go get her book. But we'll go ahead and get started. I have Christine on the prayer list and I have Carolyn on the prayer list. She came forward last night. Anybody else?
Why do we have
Because
Christine on that?
yeah, because she'd been so sore and miserable and having struggling to get around. So,
They did change her medicine, and then I think she goes for shots tomorrow.
Okay.
Maybe that'll help.
okay. All right. Anybody else we need to pray for at the moment that we can think of? Okay, well, let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the opportunity that we have to be here this evening to study your word. May we study your word in truth with open minds so that we may see what you would have us to know and have us to do in our lives. May we take your word and store it up in our hearts so that we will not sin against you. May we take this knowledge into our lives and be able to share it with others and bring them to you. Thank you so much for providing us the word so that we may know what your expectations of us are and so that we may be pleasing to you. Right now, I want to pray that you be with Carolyn and all that she's going through, be with Kay and the rest of the family during this struggle. I pray that you help strengthen Carolyn and that you will help us to be supportive of her so that she will be able to overcome the struggles of sin in her life at the moment. I pray right now for Christine that her health will improve and she will be able to meet with the saints again. May her injections go well and be successful. I want to pray right now for the flooding that we're experiencing. I pray that you keep people safe who are having to deal with it. I pray that you keep homes safe and help us to look out for those people who are in need during this difficult time. And may we always be ready to aid, and in doing so, may we bring them to you. I want to thank you most importantly for Jesus and the eternal sacrifice that he is for us. And it's through his most holy and righteous name that we pray. Amen. Okay. Month 7, chapter 7. It's fashionable to break this one. Thou shalt not commit adultery. As we each celebrate with our families, I will be thinking of you. I can't imagine my life without you, even if I have to share you. I can't imagine not having you in my life. Let's start living our lives for us. Unbelievably, these are captions on greeting cards made specifically for adulterers. They're celebratory of the breaking of the 7th commandment, and they've made a successful business for Kathy Gallagher of Bethesda, Maryland. Adultery itself is a popular venture today. Conservative estimates are that about 15% of married women and 22% of married men have cheated. Some studies have the figure nearer to 50%, to the 50% mark. It's hard to tell exactly, however, because people who are not displaying integrity in their marriages are likely not going to display it in a survey about their marriages. Whatever the case, the initial statistics are too low because they do not include those who are actually living in adulterous marriages. Yes, adulterous marriages is an adjective that may correctly modify marriage, and it fits hundreds of thousands of marriages in America today. Okay, yes, adulterous is an adjective that may correctly modify marriage. Sorry, Miss Shirley was jumping on here, so I was distracted as I read that. So, adultery. We're going to start out by looking at David. So we have number 1, like David's adultery with Bathsheba in 2 Samuel chapter 11 that we examined last month, most adultery is generally preceded by reckless. Okay, here we go. All right. So now that it is back up and going. Okay. Number 1, like David's adultery with Bathsheba, 2 Samuel chapter 11 that we examined last month, most adultery is generally preceded by reckless risk-taking and tactical spiritual errors that could have, if avoided, lessened the likelihood of adultery. List the things that David should have done differently before the actual act of adultery. All right. So what do we have here? Could have gone back inside. Very, very important thing there. What else?
Not asked about her and sent for her.
Okay, not asked about.
I have not let thoughts go into his head.
Yes.
Or rejected them when they got there. He should have
Yes.
sent the messengers to get her.
Okay. Should have gone to war in the first place. If he would have gone to battle with the other kings, like it says, that wouldn't have been a problem at all. So
I don't know why, but I have difficulty sometimes understanding the questions. So I said not lie with parents when he found out, but that's part of it.
well, that's another thing. Like, you know, when he came to her, when she came into his presence and it was discovered everything at that point, and he verified, because the question was, is this not Bathsheba? Blah, 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 blah. So when he sent for her, he could have, and once he verified, yep, this is Bathsheba, he could have sent her away at that point. So there are a great many things that David could have done. What? Okay. So he should have gone to battle. He should have looked away. He should have changed his thoughts. He should not have inquired. He should not have sent for her. All kinds of things. David should have done a whole bunch of things different. Okay. Any other thoughts or questions on that one? I think that one's pretty easy. Like we covered it last month. It's pretty easy to see. David's sin, it was just sin on top of sin on top of sin. Question 2. This may be the most practically important part of the lesson today. Let's brainstorm and list some of the precautions that married women can take to build fences around the sanctity of their marriages. Of course, men can do the same thing, but this lesson is for women. What can we do? Let's think about different categories as we formulate these rules for ourselves. Let's be personal and practical and specific. Just do your best, and then the group discussion can be a great finisher. Okay? So we start with 1 Timothy chapter 2. There's one by Dad's pew, by Dad's stuff. Okay. So 1 Timothy, and I got to tell you, 1 Timothy chapter 2 is one of the most unpopular verses with women today. Not the most unpopular, but one of the most unpopular verses. So what do we see in 1 Timothy chapter 2 that will help us affair proof our marriage?
I guess the way we dress.
Okay, the way we dress. 1 Timothy 2:9 says, likewise also that women should adorn themselves in respectable apparel with modesty and self-control, not with braided hair and gold or pearls or costly attire, okay, but with what is proper for a woman who professes godliness with good works, okay? I did too. I said 9, but I read 10 also. So in 9, it talks about dressing respectably, being modest, being self-control, being discreet. This braided hair, historical context is important. Lyra's braid is not inappropriate. The braided hair that we are talking about is where they are braiding gold and beads into the hair. It was a very overt show. Oftentimes, the braided hair, the plaited hair, this ornate, elaborate hairstyle with all the gold and jewels, and then this costly attire that went with it. Some of this was how the temple prostitutes dressed. So the idea is, do not dress in such a way that somebody is going to think you are a temple prostitute. That's a problem. Remember, we're supposed to be, we're the ecclesia, we're the called out. We should be different. People should look at our lives and know that we're unique. If we look like the prostitute, that's not very unique. Cindy did a mini podcast on this one, and it talked about our dress, and the King James, New King James, they talk about shamefacedness. This means we should be able to blush. We should be able to feel ashamed when we are putting on clothes that's not modest. One of the things I hear over and over and over again, and I will talk about it over and over and over again, is the fact that, we hear people say, well, there's not a dress code. The Bible didn't give us a dress code. The Bible did give us a dress code. God set a standard, because here, when Paul is talking to Timothy and he's telling the women, saying that the women need to dress modestly, what's the standard? How are they going to determine what's modest? Yes, by the Old Testament. So they can't look at the Greek and Roman cultures to determine what modesty is. Okay, because remember, we're called out, we're separate, we're different. So to understand what modesty is, that's where we go back to the Old Testament and we look at how God clothed Adam and Eve. We look at the word garments. In the Hebrew, it's a word that means being clothed from shoulders to knees. Some scholars will even say it meant shoulders to ankles. When God is giving them the commandments about how the priestly garment should look, he says that they are to wear linen breeches underneath their not a tunic, but underneath their priestly attire, because they were not to uncover their thigh. It says that the linen garments, the linen breeches, are supposed to go from the hip to the knee so that their nakedness should not be uncovered. Okay, so in saying this, in giving this commandment, that's where God set the standard. Hip to knee. This needs to be covered, otherwise we see their nakedness. Okay, let's translate that into New Testament verbiage. That was for the Levitical priesthood. What are we today in the church? We're a holy priesthood. We are all to be priests. So if this is how the priesthood was supposed to present themselves, making sure their nakedness wasn't showing, then that's how we need to present ourselves today, making sure our nakedness is not showing. And again, this idea of when we look at the garments, the same word used in Genesis to say garment is the same word that we see used to describe Joseph's coat of many colors. Now, when we talk about Joseph's coat of many colors, do you picture like a waistcoat? Are you picturing something shorter, or are we picturing something longer? Okay. Yeah. So we think of something, it's longer. It's this outer layering. It's this clothing that covers us, which is exactly what God created for Adam and Eve. It's something that covers them. Good evening. I'm glad you made it. So that's something we have to keep in mind. And so he tells us, dress this way and avoid this, but to make sure that we are being godly, we need to clothe ourselves with good works. So to help with our marriages, we need to make sure that what God has reserved for the bedroom and for our husband's eyes, we keep it to our husband's eyes. 92, Sharon, we're on the first one. Second one, 92. Question 2A. Our culture has this idea of a trophy wife, the one who's just gorgeous, and she gets out there and the guy's like, look at my wife, isn't she hot? Guys, check her out. First off, if a woman is married to a man who wants to show her off, that's a bad man. That's the wrong man to have been chasing in the first place. But as we look at it, and the church has done this bad job over the years of not giving credit where credit's due. There's a lot of discussion about sex being bad. Well, sex is actually very good when it's in the confines of marriage. And so we need to keep everything relating to that in the confines of marriage, including what our husbands see and who else sees us. On the flip side of that, women should not deprive their husbands of that visual experience. That's, again, our culture has this our culture swings from one extreme to the other in what women are supposed to think and do, and don't listen to the culture. But women are very self-conscious about our bodies. You know, oh, we're overweight, or oh, we have stretch marks after having kids, or oh, I didn't shave today, or, you know, whatever it is. And so there's all these issues. And so we tend to cover up around our husbands. And that's the wrong idea too, because if we aren't allowing our husbands to be visually stimulated with us, they're going to be visually stimulated somewhere else. So things to keep in mind with how we dress to help protect our marriages. Any other thoughts on that one? Okay. Social media. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Now, some of you don't do social media, so you're lucky on this one. So what do we find on social media? How can we behave on social media that can help protect our marriages? What about verse 12? Well, you better open up your Bible and tell me what you're looking at then.
Do not judge by popular law, but I don't have a verse.
Okay. So 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 1 through 8 talked about, and I put this down, I think this is part of it, but it talks about not fighting with your brother in public, and not taking our quarrels before the unrighteous. And I think that's a big thing with social media and how we behave and how correct. Okay.
And we don't need to get on social media and, if you got a problem with someone, I've seen a lot of people do that.
Well, and I know I have been guilty in the past. I actually had one of our best friends call me out on it. It was at a really rough time in our marriage, and I had gotten on Facebook and I was complaining about Dale on Facebook, and that man, and my friend called me up, and I love Johnny. Johnny's just a straight shooter, and Johnny goes, Jenny, what you're doing on Facebook is inappropriate. It needs to stop right now. It was like, you're right. I'm sorry. So we don't need to get on Facebook and complain about our marriages. You get on Facebook and complain about your marriage, and you're going to have a lot of people give you information like, well, you just need to be happy and you should just get out of this marriage. You might have somebody who, you know, that guy friend who's just being nice, and he's like, oh, honey, you deserve a guy who's so much better. And so you wind up with somebody comforting you.
Once from that another Christian had put on there
Oh,
from somewhere else, and they were being critical, very, very critical of a neighbor.
Mm.
And, you know, it just didn't sound good at all. I didn't
Yes.
say anything. I didn't comment, but it was not.
yes, we do have.
What kind of influence she had?
Yes. Yes. So as Christians, if we're willing to get on social media and smear our neighbor and, you know, maybe complain about something that's going on. I know there are, and for some towns, there are these news and event pages, groups for the town. And some people will get in there and just fuss and fight back and forth for everybody. It's a small town. We already know you're fussing and fighting anyway. So now you're going to do it on the internet where everybody in the world can see it. You know, and things like that. So as Christians, if we're behaving in that manner, then we need to be really careful. And I think just about every Christian who is on social media has had that struggle, either thinking, oh man, I'd really just like to say something, or maybe they said something in response to somebody else, or maybe they put the post out there to start with that was complaining or causing problems. I mean, social media can be a huge, huge problem for Christians.
People you see doing a lot of, they're just very needy. They need some type of validation or something, they're just not getting something somewhere. They're just getting my thing very needy.
So that's a great point. So complainers are needy because they're not getting validation from the right point. As Christians, when Christians are complaining and they're needy, where are we lacking?
I should go to prayer, but.
Okay, we should go to prayer. Okay, but we're lacking in the word. Okay, we like to think, well, nobody ever has it as bad as me. Nobody could ever know what I'm going through. Nobody's ever suffered this. Nobody's whatever. You want to talk about suffering? Read through the Psalms. Man, when you're going through a hard time, you read through the Psalms and you're going to be like, oy, 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 a lot of people suffered. A lot of people struggled. Read through James where it talks about count it all joy when you encounter trials, because this is going to increase your faith through the whole process. So when people are whiny and needy, they're lacking validation in God's word because they're not using that tool enough. They're looking to get validation within this realm instead of within the spiritual realm. So that's a really good point.
And the ones that are Christians, you can't help them.
Correct.
I tried that once, and I pretty much got put in my place real quick, and I knew right then there was
Yeah, you have to be really careful because when people aren't Christians and we have to when we're trying to get them to understand, they don't like that sometimes. That doesn't help either.
I can be if I want to. I wasn't.
Yeah.
At the time.
Okay, let's also look at verses 13 through 20. This is talking about sexual immorality. And it talks about the body is not meant for sexually immoral acts. All of our bodies are members of Christ's body. And so we need to flee from sexual immorality. And when we think about Facebook, again, there's some of this modesty stuff that's tied into it. You see people posting, and the whole point is they're posting a provocative picture. They're posting low-cut cleavage. They're posting short bottoms. They're posting, midriffs. They're posting they've gone to the lake and they're out here in their bathing suits. They're posting, and again, this is guys too. This is guys. Guys more and more are trying to do these sexy selfies. So, as we deal with this, it's very easy to be on social media and to get caught into seeing something you shouldn't see.
You go to Walmart, and on one hand, I'm thinking, bravo for having that kind of self-confidence. And the other hand, it's like, put that there.
See, it's not self-confidence it's not strong self-confidence. It's a lack of self-respect. That's where the difference is. We don't understand how we should respect ourselves. Another interesting thing is I was listening to some information about social media. My social media is pretty much tied to Facebook, but Instagram is huge, especially with young people. Instagram's nickname is Instaporn. You can get pornography on Instagram apparently without even trying. And there are no filters, there's no parental controls, there's none of this. And so it's very, very easy when you're dealing with social media to have very negative images that we don't need to be seeing popping in. There will be crude joking on these things. Somebody shares a joke and it's totally inappropriate. But you start reading it, man, it's like, oh, man, now I got that image in my head and I've got it, and you thought, you didn't think it was going to be anything and it was. And so social media can really cause problems in terms of airing dirty laundry when we shouldn't be, and creating a lot of problems with sexual immorality. Any other thoughts or questions on that one? That was almost the whole chapter. Okay. the next was business attire, which I got off on my dates to know when and who and what. And forgot to tell you guys that it was not Leviticus chapter 20. So Leviticus chapter 20 had nothing to do with business attire for us. It had everything. It's Proverbs 31. Proverbs 31 is the second half of Proverbs 31 is the virtuous woman. So as we, not attire, business activities. I read that wrong every single time. That's where my dyslexia kicks in and I put letters together without reading them. Okay, so business activities. How, as Christian women, can we conduct ourselves in our business activities that will help affair-proof our marriage?
13 to 20.
Yes, but there was a lot. I mean, she seeks to do good. She works with willing hands. She rises early to provide food. She takes care of her body. She helps those in need. Her household is well clothed for the season. She creates objects to sell. She's well prepared for the future. She chooses her words carefully. And basically it boils down to the fact that she's not idle. That old adage that idle hands are the devil's playground. Well, of course you've never heard of that. You're too young and I don't use the phrase in our house. But when you're idle, I mean, and I've heard about this, women who, and I'm not, trust me, I'm all about a homemaker. Like I think homemaking is a wonderful career and I think more women need to be homemakers. But if you're not being a good homemaker, if you are idle around your house, that can cause a lot of problems. What are you out doing? Are you out spending money that you shouldn't be out spending instead of saving money and, you know, finding ways to earn money at home? Again, this woman made objects at home and sold them. You know, are you going out to the stores and just being ridiculous out there, just trying to meet people? Are you going over and hanging out with friends who are a bad influence? So the idea of not being idle, we have to be about business of some kind. And for us, I mean, especially for the homemaker, I mean, our business is the kingdom. Keeping the house, you know, raising children. I have lots of friends who are homemakers who they spend their time getting their, because they don't have kids or their kids are grown or whatever, they spend their time getting their house ready and they're always setting up for home Bible studies, that type of thing. So they find ways to be busy for the kingdom or busy for their families, as opposed to being idle and allowing temptation to come in.
I guess I misunderstood that. I thought it meant if you're like working or
Mhm.
something, how do you keep from, you know?
Well, and that's a good point too. So there was,
I just put, you know, you might not want to put yourselves, if you are working outside the home, you might not want to put yourself in a situation where you'd be alone with the man for long
Yes.
periods of time.
yes,
Or, you know, or something like that. You know, I guess I misunderstood. that.
you didn't. That's your response is completely appropriate. Again, that there's more than one way. There is more than one way for a woman to be busy. Again, there's homemaking, which is great and fine, but there's also working outside the home. I mean, there was a time when I worked outside the home, and there were situations that I had to be very careful that I was in. I worked on call in the OR, and there were times I would get called out in the middle of the night to go to the hospital. And let me tell you, there's about 6 people in an OR bigger than the church building, like bigger than the whole upstairs of the church building. There were 20 empty rooms and 6 people. Let me tell you, you could have gotten away with quite a bit if you weren't careful. and trying to protect your marriage. Dale and I were having a conversation. One of the, the rules of thumb is never find yourself alone with the opposite sex. And Dale and I were having this conversation. I'm like, what if you go for a job interview? Man, I've been, and it was really kind of one of those thoughts, because it's like, I've been on job interviews. My manager for my first my first 3 nursing managers, they were men, and there were different times I had to be in the office, and it was like,
You have to.
and there's some, and that's where Dale and I were having this conversation about, well, what do you do in those circumstances to protect yourself? And things like doors being open, if you can possibly leave the door open. A lot of offices nowadays will have a big glass window so that you might have to be alone with the door shut in the manager's office because there's something of sensitive nature that has to be discussed, but people can see in there to make sure there's nothing going on. Making sure you're not staying, are you volunteering to work late so you can work with somebody versus, yeah, but that happens, that happens. So, being very careful, carpooling, that's another thing, if you're carpooling, make sure you don't find yourself in a situation, I think carpooling is great, but say, you're normally carpooling with 3, there's 3 of you in the car and it's 2 girls and a guy, but one day the other girl calls in sick and it's just you and the guy. And it's like, what do you, so there's just a lot of things to be very careful with making sure that we are being diligent in our work. So even in the office, at the hospital, at the school, at Walmart, if that's what your job is, whatever your job is, be very careful to make sure that you're there working and you're not idle. And you're setting an example. So as Christians, when we're out and about in the workforce, we need to make sure that we are setting a biblical example, not being idle, not stirring up trouble, that we are making sure that we're providing well. This whole, providing well, I can have a good job and I can be bringing in lots of money, but if I'm stopping at the casino on my way home after I get my paycheck, that's not providing well for my family. And that's a business activity as to what I do with my money that I've earned. I used to work with a nurse who her husband was oil field, made great money, he had his own company. She worked as a nurse purely because he would not give her any money to gamble. And she gambled every penny of her nursing salary away. I'm like, that's a lot of money to be gambling away. Are you kidding me? I'm like, we live off of my nursing salary and you're gambling that away. Blew my mind. So, being appropriate with our business activities. Okay. Hospitality. So this actually kind of you had to look a little bit at both of these verses to really get to put the picture together. I did not understand this question at first. Like I got the 1 Thessalonians 4 pretty easily. I was not understanding 2 Samuel, so I had to go to the group and ask. And when they said it, I was like, oh, well, duh, Jenny. You should have just thought about that. Well, I'm telling you, it.
I just thought it had to do with if you're being hospitable, you're having people,
Okay.
if you don't want to have a man, come to your house and just you and him be there,
Yes.
Even if it is a close friend or
Mm-hmm.
something, you just have to be careful.
Yes. Yes. So
I told one guy not to come by unless Kevin was home at the time.
Yeah. And you have to do that
But
sometimes.
if he was innocent and I was innocent,
Yeah.
I just said it didn't look good.
That's right. It didn't look good. And you didn't want it to look bad. And so, we're taught, this whole, it's hard. It's hard. As we look at 1 Thessalonians 4, 1-7, it's talking, controlling your body, avoiding sexual immorality. That's pretty simple. And then when we kick over to the 2 Samuel 13, You had verse 8 in there as well. Okay.
So Tamar moved to her brother Amnon's house where he was from, and she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight, and baked the cake. I'm saying she had hospitality that she would go to.
So she did have the hospitality to go to the house, but then we wound up with a big problem.
The dad was the king and he told her to do it.
Yes, yes. So King David says, your brother's requesting you go do this. She does.
Verse 10 says, Then Amnon said to Tamar,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm going to go ahead. At the end of 9, it says, send everyone out from me. So everyone went out from her.
Okay.
And she found herself alone.
Yes.
Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food into the chamber. Into the chamber that I may eat from your hand. So Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. So she also had the hospitality. Okay. But she should have said, hey, I can't go in there.
Okay.
There's nobody else.
So we wind up with this situation where, she goes, Tamar goes, she makes the cakes, and then Amnon says, all right, everybody else go away. Now, Tamar, you come here. So I'm sure Tamar didn't think anything about this. This was her brother, half brother, but this was her brother. Probably, I could be wrong. Maybe he was just a sleazy kind of guy and she had suspicions anyway. But based on the fact, like, we don't see any concern. She probably didn't think much about this. But then he seizes her and she tries to stop him. And, don't behave in such a way. We can't do this. He forces himself upon her. And then he hates her after he has raped her. So, we need to be willing to serve, and we need to be willing to be hospitable, whether it be in our house or in somebody else's house, even, taking, we've had a lot of, it feels like we've had a lot of deaths recently. So we've, taken a lot of food to people's houses. So we're doing that, maybe it's a matter of somebody needs help with their kids while they go do something. So we go to their house to help deal with the issue for them. Sometimes when, and usually this is a little bit more just family, but when mom has a new baby and they're at the hospital, mom and dad are at the hospital, somebody might come into the house and clean the house for them and make sure it's all in order before they come home and got groceries and everything. So there are ways we can be hospitable in our home or in somebody else's. We just have to make sure that, as Sharon was saying, we don't put ourselves in bad situations. We don't let people come in when we're there alone. We definitely, good friends. So that can be an issue. It's actually, affairs usually don't happen with weird, like one night stands are not, but one night stands are not normally they're not normally the affair. That's not the average affair. The average affair is you have a close relationship with this person. And so having our good guy friends over, or even, so, say your husband's buddy, he comes over, waiting on, hey, we're all supposed to grill out, but Dale, he's late at work today, come on in, no big deal. And you get to chit chatting or whatever, and, things go too far. So we do have to be careful. And I know it's hard sometimes. Dale worked oil field. Dale was gone a lot. So I know what it's like, and it's hard to make sure that we're being really careful. The farther you live out in the country where people can't see you, you really got to be careful there to protect your marriage too. I mean, because it's again, growing up in the country.
I think it's harder for you younger ones than it would be for us older. Not me, only. So it's not that big deal, really. I mean,
you know, well, but it might not be a big deal for you. But here's the other thing. So I was listening to a podcast by Tony Brewer, who's from this area. So some of you guys probably may know or know Tony, heard of Tony. But he was talking about modesty and how there are times when women can do everything exactly like we're supposed to. He was like, there are times women could be dressed in a burlap sack, and some man is going to have a perverse mind, and we can't stop there. Like, we can do our part to not entice the sin.
Well, it's not just men.
Oh, you're right.
I mean, women, I've been in around it's just worse than any man I've ever heard.
So and I say I'm using it this way because, again, it's how can we help protect our marriages? But you're right, in the sense, the idea is most of the time the man is the visually, men are the visually stimulated sex, which is true. God designed them that way. So more times men are very visually stimulated. I make no bones about the fact I am a very visually stimulated woman. There are a great many movies, TV shows, whatever, I cannot watch them because the guy's in there without his shirt on and it's like, nope, wrong thought. I can't do it. Really. I'm very visually stimulated. And so to make sure that it's not a problem, I just don't watch it. Dale was teaching the teens one time back home, and it was divided up. It was tough subjects for the teens, and they divided up. Dale had the sex lesson with the teens. And so I was, in discussing how we need to protect our brothers and sisters within the church, and then protect everybody out there and ourselves. I pulled up this list from Cosmopolitan magazine, and it was the top 10 things that men find attractive on a woman and the top 10 things that women find attractive on men. And, it's really interesting to see, like lips. I can't do, I have lips. Now, I can't help it if a man finds my lips attractive. I don't do anything to my lips. Like, they're just kind of there. Even lipstick, there's nothing wrong with lipstick. But some men are just very visually attracted. That eyes, that was on the list. Well, what do we do? Do we, are we wearing veils all the time?
Sunglasses.
Yeah, there were things. It was really funny. And this is, again, in talking about the rule of modesty, and the teenage guys were like, what? Knee pit. That was in the top 10 of things. When a man looks at the back of a woman's knee, it is very, very, and some of the teenage boys were like, what? But mind you, this is worldly men. Like, this was Cosmopolitan magazine, mind you. Like, it's as dirty as you can get while being clean, if you can say that. So that's, things like that. For women, arms, women love to look at a guy's arms. Dale used to pitch hay, let me tell you. I was like, whoa, honey. I was like, who needs to go to the gym and weightlift? You just need to go pitch some hay and, different things like, so women are very some women are very visually stimulated. Yeah. Honey, that's real sexy when you're over there, like, bent over loading that dishwasher.
I probably would have missed that one, but I guess I'm overall.
But these are things that, again, that's why there is the shoulders to knees cover up that God gives us, because we are very visually stimulated. So while Sharon, you might not be, it's, oh, that's not even on my radar. It might be on that man's radar. We can be fully clothed, completely modest, but Sharon, you got beautiful eyes, and that man's going to look at your eyes and go, oh, Sharon, we can't control them. We can't, the only person we can control is ourselves. And so that's why we have to be careful with letting them in our homes by ourselves and things like that. Not finding yourself alone with two men. And that works in the work situation as well. Being very careful with finding yourself alone with two men. When you talk about doing Bible studies, there's a lot of discussion, a man should never be alone doing a Bible study. But then it becomes tricky as, well, do you take another man with you? Do you bring a woman along as the silent part, your wife along as the silent partner, so it gets tricky to make sure as to how you're handling these situations. So hospitality, don't find yourself in a bad situation is the moral that we're getting at here. Any other thoughts or questions on hospitality?
That might explain some of the reasons why
Well, we're not going to go there, sis. All right, conversation. How can we work within our conversations to affair-proof our marriage? So Colossians 3. What did we find there? Mm-hmm. Okay, Colossians 3:8, obscene talk, filthy or foul. So we need to make sure that we're not saying things we shouldn't. What did we find in Colossians 4:6? Okay, so our speech should be gracious and seasoned with salt. So there's the contrast. Avoid the foul language, avoid the filthy talk, and make sure that our words are gracious and seasoned with salt. Okay, that's pretty simple. So then we jump over to Proverbs 6:24. What do you have? Okay, so in Proverbs 6:24, to preserve yourself from the evil woman and from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. We need to make sure that we're avoiding obscene, filthy language. Our speech needs to be gracious and seasoned with salt. And we need to make sure that we don't have the smooth tongue of an adulteress. I think of inappropriate compliments. I think of, as Dale and I went through some marriage training last year, it talked about making sure you're careful in who you confide your information in. You should never confide marriage, and I've heard this in other places, never ever confide your marriage troubles with someone of the opposite sex. You wind up with that, and you have to be careful about letting them. Now, there's counseling situations. That's, not talking about that, but just in general, this bashing of them or just the whining, complaining, being careful about saying things to the opposite sex because they will come back, and too often they aren't giving you godly advice. They are giving you things that you might want to hear, things to help soothe your hurts at the moment. We might say that to somebody else, and we have to make sure that we're not using our words in such a manner. Any other thoughts on that? Some of this stuff is just way over your head, Lara, and that's okay.
No, it's not that.
All right. Body language. Proverbs 5. Verse 19. A lovely deer, a graceful doe, let her breast fill you at all times with delight, be intoxicated always in her love. Okay. Hang on. In 5, though, if we jump over to verse 20, it says, why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? So we need to keep our bodies under control around men. We need to not be tempting and coming across in ways that are suggestive around men that don't belong to us. Okay. What do you have in 6? It's 6, 25, and 29.
It's 25 through 29.
Oh, 20, yep, through 29.
I only have 25 and 20.
Okay. Got it?
Yes. Do not desire her beauty in your heart, and do not let her capture you with her eyelashes.
Okay.
Then verse 29. So if he who goes into his neighbor's wife, none who touches her will go on.
Okay. So,
I don't know why I have
okay. So don't try to entice someone who isn't our husband. I think, is really the takeaway for me in all of this. Don't try to seduce somebody else. Again, keeping what belongs to your husband. It kind of always, as I have read through these, it makes me wonder this neighbor's wife. And I think about, in the commandments, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. And I'm like, I always just thought about, the neighbor next door. That's what I always, being younger, I was always like, oh, just next door, which that's an easy temptation, is next door. But as we go into the New Testament, Jesus makes it pretty clear, who's my neighbor? Well, everybody is. So So we have to be very careful with that whole, your neighbor's wife. That could be just about anybody. So, okay. We'll go ahead and call it quits for tonight. Any other thoughts, questions, comments on what we have talked about so far about, or any other ideas? Because she talked about at the beginning of 2, is there anything here that she didn't cover that we can use to help protect our marriages from adultery? I mean, she covered some big ones, but I mean, there's always more stuff to cover. Attitude, okay? If you are that lovely proverb about, it's better to live on the roof than in a house with the wife that, has the nagging, the dripping, our attitude towards our husbands makes a big difference. Our attitude towards our marriages makes a huge difference. If my attitude is my marriage is disposable, like you talk to young people today, and the attitude is, well, for my first marriage and for my second marriage, and for there is no concept whatsoever of a lasting marriage. None. There isn't anything here. They fully expect that they will be divorced. Yeah, and it's no wonder why, because they're being raised in broken homes.
That, and it's not taught enough in the church.
It's not taught.
We taught it.
Yeah.
Jen and I both did, and Brandon and Aaron, they teach it in their teenage classes. But a lot of times it's not taught.
Correct.
You don't, one marriage,
Yes.
that's it, unless, only one reason, that kind of thing.
Well, and we do have a reason that does allow for divorce. And Dale and I have counseled many people before. Just because there is an exception to the rule doesn't mean you have to take it. I've talked with people who, well, they had an affair, so I'm gone. And it's like, God said I could get a divorce. Well, he did allow you that, but have you thought anything at all? I'm like,
Did you cause this in any way?
Well, that's another thing to think, are you driving your spouse into, are you driving, for us, are you driving your husband away? Are you being that nagging wife? Are you being that wife that he doesn't want to come home to? Are you being, critical? He goes out to work, maybe he works hard. Maybe, you're both working hard, whatever, but your schedules are different and you're coming home first and you're doing stuff at the house and he comes in late and it's like, well, honey, you don't ever do anything and you're just lazy around the house. And you leave your laundry on the floor,
I pulled a little bit of that today.
but if you do, but if when you do it all the time, they don't want to come home to that, so they go somewhere else, this whole idea of the doghouse. Oh, well, you can just go sleep on the couch. You're in the doghouse. And it's like, no, that's a terrible idea. Don't put that, don't allow that anger to be in there. So don't drive your spouse away. The idea also of, and I love this idea, don't compete with your spouse, complete your spouse. So all too often in today's society, we have this big competition. Like everything is just, I'm the best, and you're always out to prove that you're the best. Well, when you're doing this in marriage and you have two people who are working, and I saw this a lot with nurses. Most of the time, nurses make good money. And so you would have women who are working at the hospital, they're making good money. Their husband isn't making as much money. And let me tell you, they didn't have a lot of nice things to say about their husband. It didn't matter that they were out working hard. It didn't matter that they did a good job. They didn't make as much money as their husbands didn't make as much money as them. And they looked down on their husbands for it. And they made sure they told their husbands this. That type of attitude doesn't do anything. The idea of one-upping each other in an argument. Oh, that's terrible too. If you're always,
I have to win.
yeah, the idea also, that one-upping and that one-upping and always trying to win, it's that whole idea of when my wife fights, she doesn't get hysterical. She gets historical. She brings up everything I've ever done wrong. And that is, and I've been there, but that's such the wrong thing to do if we're trying to have this godly marriage. It's this idea of God created, the woman to be the helpmeet, like we are to complete each other. And so making sure we have the proper attitude about, we get one shot at marriage, get one shot at it, and I understand, there is an exception to the rule. Spouses die. I get all that. But those are the exceptions to the rule. If you go into marriage with the idea of, I got one shot at marriage, I got to make it work. There isn't an exit plan. There isn't, whatever, having the proper attitude. Another thing though, to be honest, that I don't remember if she addresses this or not, picking the right spouse in the first place. Women will settle, men too, you might settle for a spouse instead of picking a good spouse. The idea is, I've seen this to help encourage young ladies, chase after God, and any man who can keep up might be worth marrying. But don't go after a guy that's chasing you. That guy better be chasing God, and he better be fighting to keep up with you as you're chasing God too. So picking a good spouse in the first place. Unfortunately, sometimes people get married before they become Christians. And then, so now, you're married and you get to know God's word. And it's like, oh, what do I do now with my husband who, is slothful and lazy and who won't even, who's an atheist and he won't, whatever, those situations are hard. They're very hard, but we still have to work to, improve our marriage. What were you going to say a while ago, Lyra?
Way you get gifts.
Okay.
This may also fall under hospitality,
Okay.
but as I was thinking, teachers appreciation.
Okay.
Say you're like when you went to say you gave a gift to your teacher, that if it's a gift they like, they can't have wrong thoughts.
Okay.
That's right.
Yep. So when we're interacting with other people, being very careful, we can take something could be completely innocent that we say, that we do, that can get turned into something wrong. And the moment we realize that, we have to speak up and let them know, wait a second, that was not what I was after. In terms of giving gifts to our spouse, we often are depriving our spouse of what they need by not knowing what they need. There are two books. One is The 5 Love Languages, and it helps you understand how you communicate love. Because all of us communicate love differently. We've talked about this before, acts of service, honey, clean my house for me. I love that. Things like physical touch, just, sitting there and holding hands. Things like giving gifts. Some people want to open up a package regularly. Time. I just want to spend time with you. I don't care if we're just sitting there reading books. I just want to spend time with you. What's the other one? I can't think of what the other one is. But figuring out what your spouse finds loving, what do they need? And make sure you speak that with them. And make sure they know what yours is so that they can speak that with you. There's a website, you can actually do a test to find out what your love language is. It's free. Another thing is, words of affirmation. That was the other thing. You're over there talking. I'm like, words of affirmation. Words of affirmation. Giving compliments, building people up with your words. So somebody whose love language is words of affirmation, if all you do is criticize and drag them down, that's a huge hit. Then there's another one, his needs, her needs, and it's the top 10 needs. And classically, what this psychologist found was these 5 needs belong to women and these 5 needs belong to men. Now, sometimes it's intermixed, but classically, this is it. And you take a test and you figure out which need is most important so that your spouse can meet that need and vice versa. So making sure that you actually know how to speak your husband's love language. You know what your husband's needs are. And these change as we progress through different stages in life. So when you're first married versus when you have kids at home versus when you're empty nesters versus when you have grandkids. And that throws a whole different dynamic into the mix. So we have all these different phases of life, and we have to make sure that we are communicating with our spouse along the way. Because if we're not communicating with our spouse, that's the first problem, because then we're communicating with other people, and we can't ever fix anything within our marriage if we're not communicating with each other. Okay, yeah. So there are lots of things that we can do to help affair-proof our marriage, how we act within our home, how we act outside of the home, lots of things. And we need to just be aware of our actions, our words, don't find ourselves in bad situations, things like that. So thank you so much for the discussion. And Sharon, I won't be here next week. You won't be here either. So that's fine. They're going camping, and I told Bill I was so mad. I've been trying for 3 years to get myself down there, and you guys picked the week that we're gone to. Yes, I was like, So we'll see you later, Miss Shirley.
For a little while, I'm not gonna spend much time.
You're still muted. Lear wants to.
I'm not gonna be a big one though, like that, if you don't care.
Listen, I went to Washington, D.C.